We're really glad to have you all here today. It was almost a year ago, maybe it was more than a year ago, that Patricia reached out to me about this event. So this has been a long time coming, and we're very excited to see it finally actualized today. So I don't want to take up any more of our time. I'm really excited to hand this microphone over to Patricia McLean, the CEO and founder of Finding Our Voices.
Thank you so much, Molly, and it is a real treat to be in Skidompha today. We are at the 7th, I think, stop of our fall Let's Talk About It library tour that took us from Millinocket and down to York. And November 28th, we have something different, which is men talking about growing up with a violent father and breaking the cycle. And that's at the Camden Library. And I want to thank all of you for coming today. And to say how Finding Our Voices started was this. I guess there'd be two sparks for it. One was the arrest of my ex of 29 years for domestic violence. It was not the first time I'd called 911, but it was the first time there was an arrest. Both times I begged the police not to arrest, but the second time, I guess it was because they were trained better, because there was about a 20-year difference. He saw bruises on me and he said he had to make the arrest. And then there were headlines, and it was mortifying, absolutely mortifying. But all of a sudden, women all around me started coming up to me in my town of Camden and telling me that they had also been through that. And it was so many women. It was my hairdresser, it was my neighbor, it was my best friend's daughter, and we both realized that her mother, my best friend, had been in it. So the three of us had been in it together, and none of us knew that we were all in domestic abuse. And so that's when I was like, oh my God, like the veil was lifted from my eyes, and I was like, everyone needs to know what I know now, and I'm a photojournalist. So I just put together an exhibit of 14 women who had told me they'd always wanted to tell their story, the survivors. And that was at the Camden Public Library, and the opening was purposely on Valentine's Day, 2019. And that was with 14 survivors. Now we're 45 with our posters all over Maine. We've been to 90 plus towns. We roll into a town with our posters up and down Main Street and just get them up in business windows and also bathrooms. And then the other spark for it would be this Bangor, it's right here on the Bangor Daily News. Don McLean pleads guilty to domestic violence offenses. That was my ex. So for an attack, and people call it incidents. If you notice in the paper, it's like domestic violence incidents. These aren't incidents. The rampage was, 4 hours of basically being held hostage on my bed, punched, and then told he was going to kill me, not letting, sweeping the phone off the table. And then when I ran to the bathroom to try to save myself and lock the door, breaking the door down. And that's when I called 911. But so right here, he got a plea deal under terms of the deferred disposition. Does anyone know what a deferred disposition is? So it's a plea deal. It's the worst kind of plea deal because they plead guilty. And after that, they dismiss the charge as if it was never even happened. And then this is the kicker. And by the way, no jail time, and fined a total of $3,000. Assistant District Attorney Christopher Fernald said Thursday that McLean was being treated the same as any other domestic violence defendant, and the sentence was comparable to similar cases. So that, to me, was that's got to change. So now, because all these posters everywhere, we just hear from more and more women, and we've just discovered the gaps in Maine for women and children who are going through domestic violence. And as a nonprofit, we became a nonprofit 2 years ago, we are stepping up to fill those gaps with survivor power, led by survivors. And some of the ways we're doing that this is a really exciting thing. We have a pro bono dental care for survivors of domestic abuse. One woman, her teeth were rotten at 32 years old because
when she was married to this guy that she'd been with since she was 13, every time she started to brush her teeth, he would say, "Oh, so you're making yourself beautiful for your boyfriend." And so it was easier to just not brush them. So they were completely rotten. And this dentist, Dr. Pierre, she didn't want false teeth at 32 years old. He rebuilt her teeth to what the way they were. And this is what they're doing, gold standard dental care. And we have 25 dentists on board. If you do not see your dentist on this list, please try to get him to join us. We have a Get Out, Stay Out fund. And in the past, so far this year, we've dispersed about $70,000 just so far this year for shelter, food, car, and food and legal expenses. And we have online support groups. We have one that meets every week generally, and then we have one that Mary, who is my right-hand person here, runs. And that is for women whose adult children are estranged from them due to the domestic abuse. Who knew that was a thing? But it is. So many women are going through that. So that's what that support group is for. So I think for now, I'm going to introduce Sarah. And Sarah's going to give a talk about just educational. She did this for us in Barnswallow in Rockport, and I asked her, please come and give this talk again, because it just helps to educate around domestic violence. And Sarah's a survivor too. Sarah, thank you.
Hi. I just think it makes more sense to sit here and have a conversation with you rather than stand at a podium and give you a speech. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you today. I'm going to use some notes to cheat. I am so grateful for a platform such as this, created by Finding Our Voices founder Patricia McLean, who offers us these safe spaces to be able to share our stories. And my goal this morning is to give you some background on the cycle of abuse while providing you with a few vocabulary words and hopefully help you understand the nature of this mistreatment. I'll use pieces of my own story today to illustrate the dynamics of traversing the steps, beginning with realizing you are a victim, transitioning to survivor with the hope and intention of thriving through it all while navigating the normal everyday tasks of waking up, showering, making meals, raising children, getting to work, paying the bills. You get the idea. Why are we wanting to share our stories and expose some of the most vulnerable moments of our lives? To break the silence and eliminate the shame. To inform the public of these tragedies happening in our homes, behind closed doors. To educate the inner circle, the police, the lawyers, the DAs, the judges, that have a direct impact on victim safety and their ability to protect themselves and their children. And to change the system, which some say is broken, but I say was created to ultimately maintain power and control over women in a patriarchal society. When you think of domestic violence, let's be honest. We picture a battered woman, bruises explained away by a bad fall, likely living in a poor community with little education. Hollywood has done a great job of facilitating that myth. I prefer to use the term, and here is your first vocabulary word, domestic abuse. Is it the same as domestic violence? Yes. But by using abuse instead, we create a different image. Abuse is not always violent. Domestic tells us it's happening within a household, between family members or intimate partners, and abuse describes not only the physical piece, but it also includes the emotional, the sexual, and financial assaults that we have all experienced. I shatter the stereotypes of domestic abuse. I am a strong, financially independent, well-educated entrepreneur with a stable home and a wonderful, supportive family. I was married to a man for almost 10 years. We had 2 amazing kids, and we are successfully divorced. He is my best friend. An incredible dad. We take our vacations together. We celebrate our holidays together, and he is my go-to whenever I have a car question. We co-parent incredibly well, and this includes his girlfriend. We truly encompass the meaning of family. And yet, with all of these foundational supports, I fell for a man that I would become entangled with for 4 years in an abusive relationship, that although now is over, continues to assault me using post-separation abuse that is worse than any abuse I suffered while we were together, because he now uses the only connection we have left, our 7-year-old son. I fell in love very quickly. I was wooed into a relationship using a technique called love bombing, and that is your next vocabulary word. Love bombing is a tactic that uses extreme displays of attention and affection with an intent to manipulate a person. I was enthralled with the phone calls and the flowers and the weekend getaways and the intimacy that I had been lacking before meeting him. I felt loved, cared for, sexy, worthy, and it was addicting. Once I was committed to him, there were moments, a snide comment, a question of loyalty, a backhanded compliment, a subtle conversation that would evolve into an argument over nothing. The silent treatment. He would be overly attentive to a friend or my daughter, and suddenly I would disappear. And so began, vocabulary alert, the gaslighting. Gaslighting is a manipulative method which calls into question your own sanity and power of reasoning. Now keep in mind these things were happening slowly and subtly. I can certainly stand here now and look back at those red flags flying high with flashing lights and stop signs, but in the moment, I had no idea. When you haven't experienced it, it's easy to say, she's smart, she should have known, or she chose to ignore the signs. But remember, I loved him and he loved me. And things always got better. He would smile, he would shower me with attention, say all of the words that I needed to hear to know that the moment had passed and we were going to be okay again. Until we weren't, and the cycle started all over again. For a while I thought he was bipolar, like his father, and needed help. I could help him. I wouldn't walk away from my child if he had a mental health issue. Why would I walk away from the man that I loved? Well, now I know. Mental health is not an excuse for abuse. As my mother can attest, I became a shell of the person that I had been, not only mentally isolated with my self-confidence waning, but also physically when I lost over 40 pounds in a few short months, weighing in at about 120 pounds, and I am 5'10". At this point, I was still not admitting that I was in an abusive relationship. He had a tough week at work. He's not feeling well. He's struggling with his own personal demons and any other justification I could make for his behavior. What he actually was disrespectful, narcissistic, sociopathic, and abusive. When our son was born, I began to see him differently. I hadn't planned to have a child with him. I knew he was too selfish to properly care for a child. I had 2 beautiful children from my marriage, and I was not prepared to have another. I wasn't raped, I was coerced. Reproductive coercion is a collection of behaviors that interferes with decision-making related to reproductive health. He told me he couldn't have children. I remember the doctor's appointment and the fertility testing he endured to discover that his sperm count was too low to conceive. A relief, as I did not want to share a child with him. It was a lie. When he feared I had discovered his recent affair and worried that I would end our relationship for good, I suddenly became pregnant. A miracle. A trap. As I said, I started to see him differently. Please come on in. I started to see him differently. He was possessive with our child. It was weeks after his birth before he had a name, because that was a form of control he had over me during this very fragile and vulnerable postpartum time. Breastfeeding was selfish because it meant I had my son all to myself. He was determined that I used breastfeeding as an excuse to keep him separated from his son. When he would get home from work, he would take our son into the bedroom and lock the door. This was his time, and neither my older children nor myself were allowed to interrupt him. I could hear my son crying I would know that he was hungry, but I couldn't get to him, I couldn't help him, and I certainly wasn't allowed to feed him during his time. One day, when my baby was just 7 months old, still breastfeeding and almost always with me either at work or at home, his father decided it was his turn. If I could take him to work with me, then so could he. He put our son into his car seat, loaded him into his truck, and he left. For 10 hours, he avoided my calls and my texts. He force-fed our son formula, and he brought him to construction sites strapped into his car seat or left him napping on the floor. For 10 hours, I wasn't sure where my baby was, if he was okay, if he was eating. Maybe I should start pumping. That is when I decided to leave. It took me several more months to find the courage, but I was ready to leave. And ironically, he left me. He left me and moved out of my house. And since I already had 2 children and he had nothing, he was going to take our son with him. So begins the journey of post-separation abuse, protection orders, court-ordered co-parenting counseling, mediation, guardian ad litems, witness protection advocates, pretrial hearings, motions to expedite, motions to continue, motions of contempt, emergency motions, victim statements, depositions, child support worksheets, pages and pages of discovery, and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. Not to mention the nights in hotel rooms, on friends' couches, hiding my car, selling my car to buy a new, unrecognizable one, new license plates, weeks out of state on the run, pleading with school officials, YMCA directors, coaches, and anyone with contact to my children to please be on the lookout for this man who wants to harm me and my children. Avoiding friends, not knowing who might share any information with him. Scanning the parking lot at the grocery store before deeming it safe to go inside, and then stopping at the end of every aisle to check the next before proceeding. Are you exhausted yet? In the months after our breakup, he would beg and plead to come back. He was sorry, so sorry. It was all his fault and he was going to get help. When that tactic didn't work and I didn't let him back into my house, my heart, or my head, things took a dangerous turn. Court-ordered visitation with our son was in place and the exchanges were frightening. When I would meet him for a drop-off, he would berate me for something I had forgotten or question, why was our son crying and did I bring enough diapers? And he would make notes of these things to share with the court all of my missteps that made me an unfit mother. Say goodbye to Mom, I am going to get full custody. When he would arrive to return our son, he would often be late, just a few minutes at first, then maybe 15, then an hour. When it wasn't his scheduled time, he would suddenly appear at the grocery store, a chamber event, circling my neighborhood, at the babysitter's house. And I finally discovered the tracking device that he had placed on my car. For months, he had this device set up to alert him. It would alert him on his phone whenever I arrived at my home or work, my mother's, my sister's, my best friend's house, his best friend's house, the Y, my kids' schools, their ball fields, my lawyer's office. When the battery would run low, he would climb under my car in my driveway in the middle of the night to remove it, bring it home to charge it, and return it the next night. Once discovered and the police were able to subpoena the records, they were handed spreadsheets of every mark that he had requested. So every time he would ping the device, it would record my exact location, if my car was moving, how fast, and in what direction. So that's one line. And he guesses how many spreadsheet pages. 1,500 spreadsheet pages. And that was just over a 2-month period of time. And I can actually prove that he had the device on my car for more than 4 months before I discovered it. He claims he was concerned that our son was spending too much time in his car seat. unsure of any tracking device that tells you who is in the car, but that was his justification. And the court, they agreed. They were quite lenient, and they sentenced him to 20 days in jail out of a possible 3 years. And they conveniently scheduled it so that he wouldn't miss his National Guard duty, lose any income, or miss out on Thanksgiving with his family. A protection order was put in place for myself and all 3 of my children, but he contested it, as he has the right to do. And again, the judge agreed that the kids, ages 2, 9, and 13 at the time, were not affected by his behavior, and they were removed from the protection order. My oldest began having severe, debilitating panic attacks, which kept her from school and sports and friends. And my middle man, he moved his mattress to my bedroom floor and would only sleep with me at night, afraid to leave my side. But nope, they weren't affected. Our system is set up to be reactive, not proactive, which makes sense, right? We don't put people in jail because we think they're going to commit a crime. But when you're a protective mother, this is a really hard concept to accept. My court order says that my ex cannot have firearms. The police actually went into his home and removed them. My son has since described to me in great detail the closet full of guns at Daddy's house. That to me is a pretty clear violation of the court order. However, the police cannot go back inside the house just to check. Only if he gets caught using the gun will it be a violation. In our court order, we now use a third party for drop-off and pickup for our son's visitation. That third party, non-biased person providing a safe space for this exchange, selected by the judge, is his mother. Don't I feel like I'm entering enemy territory each time I pull in and out of that driveway? The court order also gives very specific instruction on when I can arrive and when he can arrive so that our paths don't cross, and yet I see him at almost every exchange. He's waiting, sometimes in the driveway, sometimes across the street, sometimes with the lights turned off in the dark as I approach, just waiting and taunting me. The police take a statement from me, which of course his mother will never corroborate, but the DA's office repeatedly tells me it's not really a violation and not worth pursuing. When a very brave young girl came forward with the memories of being molested by my ex while living in her home, again, the DA's office told us this was not something that they would pursue because they didn't think they could win the case. If this had been a stranger and it had happened outside of her home, this would be a very different conversation. But domestic abuse, behind closed doors, not our problem. She asked for it. She should just leave. Why does she stay with him? She's smart. She should have known better. Sound familiar? Perhaps you've even thought these things to yourself. Your final vocabulary word, victim blaming. It needs to stop. There is no shame. I did not choose to be abused. I did not choose to expose my children to the torture and the torment that we continue to endure. I got out, but am I really out? I did not vote for a DA that chooses restorative justice and second chances over the safety of women and children in our community. I continue my journey from victim to survivor and beyond to finally thrive. That is my goal, to thrive. I am so hopeful that my vocabulary lesson, along with a small piece of my story, helps you to see domestic abuse in the light. Let's open that door. Thank you so much for listening.
Leaving Charlie was the beginning of a metamorphosis or a resurrection of who I was. That person never left, but she was buried deep, deep, deep inside a big dark hole inside of me. I really have no idea what I was thinking, that I didn't realize that this was wrong and that I didn't have to accept it and live with it. And I think I learned after I left that nothing would have made a difference, that I I could never please him, and I could never do what was right for him because he'd changed the rules midstream. I believe I came into the marriage wanting to be the perfect wife and to be the June Cleaver of my home with the little apron and having everything tidy, and that any obstacle it was up to me to fix it and to change it. He set the demands, and I thought that was the normal, and I just went along with it. And then as the years went on and it got more difficult, I was in that pattern, and I didn't realize or didn't understand that I had options, and it was easier for peace at any cost. My ex-husband was a very well-educated man, had his doctorate, charge of graduate programs. His students flocked to him. He could be a part of a group and be the life of the party and telling stories. And 5 minutes before, he could have left the house and maybe pushed my son against a brick wall. Our whole lives were set, what kind of mood is Dad in today? We had a gravel driveway, and the kids would hear a car come and they'd run to their bedrooms. It's so insidious and so hard for anyone that's not living through it to understand. A relative of my ex-husband said, if it was so bad, why did you stay? Fear and control is why I stayed. So one Saturday we were taking one of my sons out to get a jacket. My son said, "Can I get a short jacket, Dad?" As I'm in the front seat, I said, "Oh, let the kid get a short jacket." And his face turned red, and he got fumingly angry, and he stopped there and he punched me in the eye. And he said, "We're not getting any short jackets." When I retired, it just got worse, and I had decided that the only way to end it all was to end my life. And then in my last hope that maybe he would understand how desperate I was, I told him. And his reaction to that was to take out a gun. And I can still hear the cylinders spinning. And he said, "I'll show you how to put a gun to your head and be successful committing suicide." So the next day, I was at my computer and he walked by. He said, "I'm leaving and you'll never see me again." Something happened to me at that moment. Something changed in my mind. And those words, "I'm leaving you and you'll never see me again," they hit me, and I said, "No, I'm leaving you and you'll never see me again." Even though I was scared, even though I was crying, even though I didn't know what was going to happen, I knew I couldn't live there any longer. I learned that it's never too late to escape the horrors of domestic violence. I was 65 years old when I walked out the door, not knowing what was going to happen. And through the help that's out there and my own courage to get out of it, there's been hope, and I want to give everybody else that same hope, that don't give up and don't think it's too late to leave, and there's someone out there that can help you.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
I want to welcome Mary.
We left my father when I was around 7 years old. After that, it was pretty much just a number of boyfriends in and out of the household. I just remember chaos. Arguments most evenings started, just as a verbal argument between she and whatever boyfriend was on the scene at the time, would escalate to throwing things. And we would either leave the room, or somehow try to get involved where we thought we were protecting my mother. And then sometimes the violence would be turned on us, thrown across the room, smacked. My mother would wake us up in the middle of the night. She would tell us we were going on midnight adventures. And that usually meant that we were going to go find the boyfriend, who was either at another woman's house or at a bar, and do something like slash his tires. That was what was kind of a fun adventure to my mother. I was the oldest in the family, so I felt like it was my job to protect my younger brother and sister, and also my mother. I remember talking to my brother and sister after school before my mother got home and say, we've got to clean the house because that's going to make everything okay. We were all instructed on a regular basis to not discuss what was happening in our house. We had had a really bad night. The next morning, we were sitting down to breakfast as if nothing had happened. My brother and sister decided they didn't want to have children. I knew that I wanted to have children. I kind of wanted to redo my childhood through them, I guess. And I had decided a long time ago that I was never going to put my children through what I went through as a child. Promised myself, made a promise to the universe that I was going to be a good mom. And I wanted to keep, have a peaceful, loving home. I met Ed about a year after my divorce. It was wonderful the way he wanted to spend time with my children. He taught them how to play baseball in the backyard. He took all of us fishing. Once we had committed to each other, he started saying, you spend too much time with your children, you spoil them. And it was confusing to me because I thought we were doing great. What just happened? He started to tell my children they called me too much, that they were too clingy, too needy. I mean, we're talking about 5, 6, and 9, 10-year-old children. Then he wanted to start taking me on trips without the kids. He would get very angry with me because I wanted to talk to the kids on the phone every day. Ed seemed to want to stir up something when there wasn't anything. It was a lot like my childhood. I just got so turned around. I couldn't focus on work. I couldn't focus on my children. I was exhausted mentally, emotionally, physically. I was definitely not available to my children in the way that I had wanted to be. I failed. I let the monster in. I didn't realize how it had impacted my children those 5 years that he and I were together. It wasn't until my oldest had gone off to college and I noticed that there was a sudden distance between us, emotional distance between us, and we were very, very close. And finally, one day she was home around Christmas time. We started to talk about how difficult those 5 years were for her, how much anxiety and fear she felt during that time because she felt that she had to protect me. She said she always felt like something terrible was going to happen because I was always sad and scared and worried. She said she spent a lot of time soothing her brother and sister, telling them everything was going to be okay. A lot of women in abusive situations think that the children are not affected. It's not true. The children are terribly affected. They're traumatized. If it feels crazy and doesn't make sense and you're constantly asking yourself what you did wrong, it's not a good relationship. And your children see it. They see everything. Throughout my life, even after I went off to college and got my own apartment and everything, I periodically tried to discuss my childhood with my mother. She blames my father, her boyfriends, the situation, the fact that she was young, but never really acknowledging how it affected my brother and sister and I. I think now, seeing how what I did, what I allowed in my life has affected my own children, I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to untangle it. I wanted to repair our relationship. My mother just wanted to sweep it under the rug. I didn't talk about what happened to me until I met with Patricia years later. I felt shame, fear, and sadness all the time. I was just in my own little world trying to fix everything. And since I have started coming out, I have clients and friends and people tell me all the time about their experience with domestic abuse. Being able to open up to my children and discuss the past and the abuse that happened in our household has been really great because they all have stepped up. They all want to prevent this from happening in their futures and the futures of their friends. My oldest, Sophia, is working with Finding Our Voices, trying to bring the message to college campuses. And my daughter Lily is also working with Patricia and finding our voices to bring the message to high schools. And I'm really proud of them. How do I feel about my kids? I have the best kids in the world. When I say they're remarkable, they say, well, you're remarkable. And it's wonderful because we all just talk to each other and we're honest and open and untangling that pain.
Christine.
He was really fun, kind, and stable. Complimented my outfit, my makeup, my hair, everything. He gave me flowers all the time. He gave me gifts randomly all the time. He always was taking me out to dinner. Wow, he really cares about me. I've never had anything like this. At first, kind of tried to fight the idea of being taken care of, but then it was just presented in such a way like it just came from such a place of love. When I first moved in, I was told he's gonna help me get out of the debt from my divorce. That never happened. It was immediately after I moved in, the finances changed. And then it became I needed to pay more and more towards bills, and then I needed to pay more and more towards the groceries, and then it just was, everything was on my shoulders. I started to gain weight, and he would mention that regularly, like, your stomach used to be flat when I met you. It's not anymore. Little comments like that, and then they would turn into bigger comments like, I really hate your hair like that. It makes your face look even fatter. Don't like it this color. I don't like that color. I don't want bangs. It needs to stay long. And I basically had these rules. We would go out regularly with people. In the beginning, it would be like he'd shoot me a look if there was something I said or did that was embarrassing or inappropriate. It just became more and more physical out in public. If he grabbed me and shook me, that would get a reaction, but people would pretty much just look uncomfortable. I wasn't really able to see it at first. If he can quit drinking, if I can be more pleasing, if he can get a job he likes, if we can get better financially, if that person I met that was kind and nice and devoted to me is going to come back. And until then, I just need to do whatever I can to keep the peace, because it's just not worth the hell it brings on afterwards. If I was rebellious about my hair, or if I did go hang out with a friend he didn't want me to, there would be consequences for that I would have to deal with for weeks. I did experience sexual abuse. It started with just pressure to do things I really wasn't comfortable with. It turned more into like when I wasn't allowed to go out and he would go out with friends and get really drunk, he'd come back and want to do something sexual and I would have no interest in it, and he would force it. And he would say things afterwards like, well, this is exactly why your husband had an affair. So he would just do whatever he wanted to do, and then he'd make me feel guilty about the fact that I put him in a position where he had to behave that way. My absolute lowest point was probably a year and a half in, and I just had no trace of my personality left. I was weak, I was timid, I was quiet, I had no sense of myself, no sense of my own identity. Everything I did was to try to just keep the peace in the house. It wasn't even necessarily trying to please my partner, it was just to survive. I also hated myself because I was in a position that I always swore I would never be in. Anytime I saw a woman like my mother and other family members in an abusive relationship, I said to myself, that's never gonna happen. Nobody's ever gonna treat me that way. I would never stand for that. And I was tolerating every single thing I said I never would tolerate. I didn't feel ready to leave. I didn't feel that I could leave. I was afraid that I wouldn't have anybody to support me if they knew exactly what was happening and I wasn't gonna leave. I think the best thing to do to help somebody in a situation like that is to do what my best friend did. When I pulled away, she would give me space, but always stayed kind of right around and just always made it clear that I always had a place to go. Keep the door open, keep the conversation open, make sure that person knows you're not judging them and you don't think they're stupid and they can come to you at any time. The importance of breaking the silence over domestic abuse is everything is an act. You're pretending everything's okay. So getting out of that and talking about it is so freeing and liberating for the survivor, but it also gives us a chance to educate other people. Now that I have gotten involved in Finding Our Voices, they'll say, I saw your poster, or I saw this post on Facebook that you were in, and I was in a situation like that too. Anyone who's in the situation needs to know they're not alone.
So here we are. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pass the mic. I'm going to ask Mia and Ida and Deb and Ashley to just introduce yourselves, please, and talk a little bit about your situation. And then we're going to just open it up and just talk about different topics and put it out to the panel. So Mia, can you start?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Mia Mantello, and I live in Lincolnville. I grew up in Camden, and my domestic abuse happened many years ago. I married somebody very young, and I married the person because he had signed up to join the Army, and if I didn't, we couldn't figure out how we would see each other after we'd fallen in love unless I was legally tied to him. So, you know, an Army dependent. So that was why I married early, which I never thought I'd do. And the violence started pretty early. And it got pretty bad, and I had some bad experiences with police in Maine where we lived, in Florida when we lived there, back in Maine again, and I found that people were incredibly afraid of him. And I only saw two people ever stand up to him. And that it was a hard thing to live with. It was a hard thing to live in a small town and have it happening to me. It was a hard thing that my family didn't seem to know what to do, so they just kind of ignored that it was happening. So it was difficult. And I think these are supposed to be short introductions.
Thank you, Mia. And Ida, can you introduce yourself and just tell folks just a little bit about you and maybe how long you've been out, and if anything is still going on as far as post-separation abuse?
Sure. My name is Ida. I'm a teacher. I live locally. I've seen a lot of you around. I have been out of my domestic abuse situation for about 4 years, maybe a little bit more. I was 25 when my relationship started, and I was married to him for about 10 years, and we were together for about 13. And yes, post-separation abuse is a part of my every single day. I have 3 children. The oldest is not the daughter of my abuser, but she has had to live with him for the majority of her childhood, and just watching that happen for her was one of the most devastating things I've ever seen. My 2 younger children have to go see their father every week. It's an absolutely terrible situation. He's been arrested 3 times for DV, and I still have a protection order against him. He is not allowed to see me at this time, and so similar to somebody else, our kids get swapped through a third party, which is his mother, who he lives with. It's ongoing, and it's been me, the person who's crazy, according to him, the whole time.
I just want to ask you, you mentioned arrested 3 times, like the third time, like how about 3 strikes and you're out? Like is it each time, is it worse punishment for him or the courts?
No, not at all. The first time he got a deferred disposition, like you described. The second time, it was like nothing had happened. And the third time, just like a joke. It was...
What's the deal with that? Yeah, what is the deal with that? Seriously. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Deb, and Deb is an author, and she has her book here, Household, and that she's going to be able to sell them after. Where it's, if anybody, it's an amazing book. We had an online book club, and that was one of the books that we discussed. Deb.
Thank you for being here. It matters so much to all of us to have you here, so I appreciate it. I'm a little different in that my abuser was a woman. And everything that you have seen on the screen and everything that you have heard is exactly the same for me. It doesn't change according to gender. I dated this woman for years. We decided that we would move in together. We each sold our houses and bought a third, and 2 weeks after we moved in was the first time I was screamed at. And it went on from there. 2 kids, they were adults, but they were home. I had breakfast the other day with her son. After 25 years, he still comes to see me. This was a kid who couldn't make a decision because every time he tried to make one, he'd throw up because it was going to be wrong no matter what he did. This is part of the pattern. And it isn't going to change. That's the big one that I learned. It's deliberate, and it isn't going to change. So you have to gather yourself and you move on. And I'm here today because of people like Patricia McLean and other people, I see the nods going around, that help us navigate this mess that we call domestic abuse.
Thank you, Deb. And Ashley.
Hi, I'm Ashley. I live in Rockport, grew up in West Rockport, and my father abused my mom and my sister and I. He was married to my mom. They were married for 20 years. I was 17 when we finally got out. Probably one of my earliest memories is sitting under our kitchen table while dishes were being thrown around, and he was screaming at my mother. You've heard a lot of everything that's been said is what happens, and people don't want to really look behind the door. And it was often hand-waved, the behaviors that people would see. And unfortunately, like I said, we didn't leave until I was 17, and both my mom, my sister, and I are still, to this day, we don't have anything to do with him, but we are still dealing with the psychological damage of living in a household where you're walking on eggshells every day, where you, I remember in one of the videos that you would hear the person coming home and you'd fear. I'd run to my room. I wouldn't leave my room. I ate my dinner in my room. And yeah, it scars you. It really does scar you. But I'm very happy for the work that Finding Our Voices does in getting this information out here so people know what to look for, people are educated, and that we don't have to hide anymore.
Ashley, can you just explain how you realized what you were going through? I think you mentioned that something happened at school.
Yeah. So growing up in an abusive situation, that's what you know. That, as you're raised from birth, knowing that this is how your world is, and it doesn't seem wrong because you don't know any different. And my father was very good at isolating us. we wouldn't really be able to be with a lot of people outside. We'd go to family, but he'd always, make that really hard. We'd have to leave early. So we didn't get a picture of what life was like for normal families. And it wasn't, I knew things weren't safe. I never felt safe at home. But it was actually my junior year in high school during a health class, a representative from New Hope, which if you don't know New Hope, they're an amazing state-run program.
New Hope is local, but they're under the umbrella of the Maine Coalition to End Domestic Violence. There's agencies in every area of Maine.
Thank you. A representative came in mostly to talk about dating violence. As teenagers, it is something that happens in every life stage, violence, partner abuse. And as she was talking and going through the signs, the isolation, she didn't really touch much on financial abuse. There was a little bit there, the people being put down, all this stuff, and every box just ticked in my head. Oh my God, this is what my father does. This is what I see him do to my mom. This is what he does to my sister and I. And just this realization hit me of, we're being abused. This is wrong. This is not normal. And she passed out information about New Hope to everybody, and I went home that day. My mom, it wasn't the first time. I think on average, someone suffering from domestic violence, domestic abuse will leave their partner on average 7 times before they finally get out. And we were probably on number 6 at that time. And I handed this information to my mom and I said, we're being abused. Yes, we know that this isn't okay, but we're being abused. Please talk to these people. Please get us help. I don't want to be here anymore. And that was it.
Thank you, Ashley. And one of those posters that you see up there, we actually have first-hand accounts of dating abuse from 25 Maine students, aged 13 to 25. I think that one is maybe a 14-year-old that's talking. And those are in high schools all across the state. And the importance of getting that out there. So I just thought we'd just put out some topics and just to see the pattern of domestic abuse on a power and control wheel. It is a pattern. And we'll just see who can relate to these topics and maybe say a little bit about it. Maybe we'll do isolation, and let's say, Courtney, to start with you about isolation.
So my abuser, when I met him, we did a lot of things socially. He had a lot of friends. He was really popular, Mr. Charismatic. Everybody wanted to be his friend. So we did a lot of things. We were always going out. We were having people over. We were going to other people's houses. And then slowly that started dwindling. He would go out plenty. I would do something to get in trouble and have to stay home or be sent home early. So that just kind of kept dwindling to the point that I really didn't go out with him at all anymore. And it was either I was in trouble, he was too upset, he needed to get away from me, so I needed to stay home, or there was things I needed to do at home, clean, do the dishes, mop the floor, again, whatever it was. And then I'm very close with my family. I grew up, I live in Mid-Coast, but I grew up a couple hours away. And I was not allowed to visit them as often. At first it was like, oh, well, I really wanted to do A, B, and C this weekend. Maybe you could go another weekend. And eventually it turned into, I don't want you going, period. I didn't deserve a reason. It wasn't worth pushing. So I went from seeing my mom and family where I grew up at least once a month to months without seeing them, months without seeing my friends. And I really just went to work, did some grocery shopping, picked him up drunk at the bar, and that was really it. So It was a really slow process that got to the point that I had hardly any friends, and I didn't see my family. My family wasn't allowed to come to my house anymore either. We could make a plan, like I had a birthday one year that my friends had planned a party, we had a reservation at a restaurant, and I did something that day. I think I got home from work literally 10 minutes later than he expected, because it's very timed. And that just ruined the day, and he couldn't trust me, and it ruined the whole afternoon, and there's no way he could go and pretend to be okay with my behavior and me disrespecting him, so the party was canceled. So things like that, that was how it went for me.
Yeah, I can really relate to that. I was living on the West Coast when I met my ex and moved back east with him, so I was great because my family was in Montreal, I could see my family more. And he never said I couldn't see my mother. He never said that. But I would mention I wanted to go visit, and he would blow up. Not necessarily about that, but he would just trigger this huge fight. It's not a fight because fight takes two, right? And so what happened is I just put more and more time in between asking because I just knew it was going to happen. And then I would even start to convince myself I didn't need to see my mother. I would try to do that because I just, at a certain point, it would just trigger such, what do you want to say, like a horrible thing. So it's weird mentally what happens to you. So I was doing it to myself, and I was just saying, well, you know, I don't really need to see her. But then if it was like many, many months and I felt like I have to, like I just can't go any longer, then I would just like, I would have to gird my courage, and I would know what was going to happen. I would know he was going to blow up, but I would have to, I'd say, well, it's going to be worth it because I just have to see her. But then of course when I was gone, I knew that when I got back that he would be furious. Look at all the knots. He would be furious with me, so I was stressed and I couldn't enjoy being away. So if there's any parents out there and noticing that your child is just not in touch with you as much as before, that's a red flag. But let's talk about just to segue a little bit. Does anybody have any suggestions about what to do if you, like in your situation, what would have been helpful when you were going through that for a parent to do? Or did your parent try to have you visit more, and what would have been helpful?
To say, everybody needs a telephone. Why don't you have a telephone?
You didn't have a telephone?
Not in Germany, not in Florida, and not in Maine.
Wow.
No telephone. They cost too much.
Anybody else have any comments about that? About a family or anybody want to talk? Deb.
It happens so slowly, right? That you know that something isn't quite right. Something feels off kilter, but you can't put your finger on it. A skilled abuser does this without you understanding what's happening to yourself. And I remember standing in the kitchen one morning and realizing I don't have any friends anymore. My parents lived 30 miles away from me, and I hadn't seen them in 6 months. And then, of course, there was the threat to burn my parents' house down. That really didn't help. But the basic structure is put together so slowly that you really don't understand it until you do. And when you do, it's way too late.
Well, thank you, and that reminds me of something. That's why what Courtney said the best thing would be to be patient. Don't judge. Don't be angry if you have someone that you love and then they keep going back to the person. Because if you get angry with them, they already know that they should, at that point maybe that they shouldn't be in it, but they feel trapped, they can't get out. And the thing to do is to let them know that you love them, that you're there for them, to gently remind them that what they're seeing is not okay, it's not right. So that when they are ready, like you said, that then Deb was saying, unless you see it, you don't see it. When you do see it and you are ready to get out, you have someone to call because that person is still there. Because what happens so many times is the friends turn their back and they're like, I'm not gonna, I'm done. Like, if you're not gonna leave, then, right? Like, they get impatient, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think Patricia and I have talked, we didn't even know we were living with domestic violence. I didn't know till after I left that I was a victim of domestic violence and I suffered from PTSD. And I was such that I thought I caused it. I caused what was happening. I was led to believe that. And so then I would just try harder and harder and it would just get worse and worse. But it's amazing how many women we speak to and they didn't realize they were victims of domestic violence. So that's what, if you don't leave with one thing today, is just to understand that no one chose to live with domestic violence. And just the fact, I feel I was 65 when I left. So I've had 18 years that I'm living heaven, but I live 43 of hell on earth. So just understand that no one wants to be there, but they don't even realize how to get out. I said to someone the other day, it's like being in prison with the door open, being in a cage and the door's open.
And the other thing to think about is, would you go out with somebody who yelled and screamed at you and threw things and threatened to kill your dog and threatened to burn down your parents' house? Would you go out with that person? Of course not. You don't see it until you are in a committed situation and you have nowhere to go. And that's when you begin to understand that this is intentional behavior. That was the hardest thing for me to wrap my head around, was that this was intentional behavior. This person did this to me on purpose. Think about that. The person you love is doing this to you on purpose.
Christy. I just want to say it's so important that everyone understand that that's why we're here and why we're called Finding Our Voices, because all of us, I think, on this panel didn't know other people had had this experience. We were all sort of locked in these little quiet rooms thinking, is this my fault? What's going on here? I don't know how to share this with anybody. It seems like it's just me. So that's why Patricia started this, so that we would all be in conversation about it, so you can recognize it. Women who are experiencing it can recognize it. That's the whole point of this.
Mm-hmm.
And men.
And men, sometimes, yeah,
And
for
men.
sure, for sure. Is there anybody in the audience that has any comment or question at this point? Yes.
The two words that come to mind are be consistent. No expectations from her, but be consistent with your friendship, so that she knows that when she's ready, she's got somebody on her side.
So, yes, I say keep the conversation open and the doors open. My mother voiced concerns to me pretty early on in my relationship, and I thought she was crazy. She had no idea what she was talking about. She had been in abusive relationships. I should have known that meant she knew exactly what she was talking about, but I thought, not a good judge of character. This guy's actually nice. She got more vocal with me, and I had one friend who shared with me that she thought what was going on was not okay, but she did it in a gentle way. I would never say pretend everything's fine. If you know somebody that you suspect is in an abusive relationship, don't pretend that it's okay. I feel it's important to gently let them know this is not healthy, this is not okay, I see what's going on, or I have some concerns, but I want you to know I'm here for you, things like that. So I do think it's important to let them know that you can see it, just not, you have to leave right now, you should get out, you have to do this. We all, by the time a friend came to me and said, this doesn't look good, I knew it was not good. She didn't have to tell me that, and when my mom showed up on my doorstep and said, I'm packing your stuff right now, it didn't go well. I did not pack my stuff. I suffered serious consequences for that episode.
Not my mother's fault, but I feel like I'm rambling. I don't know if anything I said is helpful, but.
Oh, would you mind if I?
No, go right ahead.
One of the things I would like to say too is, for a friend, loved one, whatever, once they're out, don't act like that's it. That was kind of the big thing for my mom is, like I said, you know, she would take us in and out a lot. The seventh time was the time that we stayed out. And what the difference was that she had the family around her saying, let me take you to a New Hope meeting. Talk to me. Like, tell me about what happened. Instead of the times before where they'd be like, oh, you're out, you're fine now. Like, you're safe, you're good, like, whatever. No, because she was still in it. She was still, like, feeling that manipulation. He was still there pulling. So it was that continued support of, let me be here for you, let me continue to be helped so you don't feel alone in what you're doing. That really helped.
And I just want to add that the worst thing is to say, it's been like 5 years, it's been like 3 years, it's been how many years, like you should be over it. This trauma runs very deep, and you never get over it.
I would say to you in particular, keep making those phone calls. Even though what you get is, oh, I've just been depressed, and you know, so what? Keep the phone calls coming. I had a friend who sent me postcards. Totally off the wall, bizarre, funny postcards, and I'd get one every couple of weeks. She was one of the first people I thought of when I knew I had to get out. That was keeping the door open. It doesn't take much, but keep it up.
My father, when he was still alive, he would show up at my house every day, or every week for lunch, and it was kind of spontaneous, and he never said it. He never said, like, this is why I'm doing this, but he did it because he knew something wasn't okay. And my dad was this very stoic Midwestern guy, but he was always there. And I don't know, that consistency was
that helpful?
That was the best, yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions?
I have to tell you that this woman's son, who is now 50, after 25 years, appeared at my back door. And when I looked up and saw him there, the first thing I did was start to cry, of course, as did he. But I opened the door and he came in and we had the first conversation about this that we'd had ever. Your daughter is caught in a place between her father and her new love. And trying to balance that is really difficult. So again, leave the door open, do the best you can. Bless your heart. We're all up here with our hands at our throats because we feel the pain that you're going through. We've been there. We know exactly what's going on.
And they end up like villainizing. Does that happen to you where your ex was telling you things about your father or people that you loved and making you feel that My daughter told me later that he was telling my daughter that I didn't love her and she was distancing herself from me, and later she told me that was why.
And Andy came back and he said, I didn't understand what was happening. And I said, I know that, it's okay. Eventually, I promise you, eventually, she will come back. But she has to do it at her speed and her understanding. I know it's hard.
Ashley? I wanted to speak a little more on the villainizing. One of the ways that my father tried to control us was that he tried to villainize everyone in our lives. Everyone from his family was okay. His family totally fine, best people. He would tell me that my mom's parents, who have sacrificed so much for my mom and my sister and I, that they looked down on us because we lived in a trailer, that they really didn't like us, and that they liked my cousins more. And when I would go out with my friends, and my social circle got bigger and I would come home, you're different. Your friends make you different. I don't like you. You're not my sweet little girl when you go hang out with your friends. And you just question everything, because this is someone that you hold in a high regard, whether father, romantic partner, their opinion matters to you, and you are in the situation where you feel like, okay, they're seeing something I'm not, and you buy into it. Because like we've all said, kind of brought up, it never starts there. It always builds up. Right. And you become, there's like that old adage of like, the frog won't know they're being boiled if you put them in the pot. But if you warm up the heat as they're in the pot, they don't jump out. And it's the same thing, and I'm so sorry. I am so sorry.
Yeah, with my ex, there was this list of safe people. Yeah. And it was never my friends or my family, and I grew up here. And we had a certain handful of people who were allowed in our house. And everybody else was seen as untrustworthy. There was something wrong with them. And it didn't start that way, but it became that way. And it became my parents, my siblings, my best friends. It was everybody, and pretty soon I had nobody.
I wonder, yes. Okay, I just want to, before I open this up, in those wheels from those young people, of the 25, at least half of these people are saying that their exes the boyfriend is threatening to kill themselves. And how many murder-suicides, domestic violence murder-suicides are there in Maine? So it's threats as manipulation, but sometimes they do, but.
Yeah, that was a tool my father used. He had a lot of guns. And one of the things that he would do when there would be a big argument, or he wasn't getting his way, or something had happened to like throw him off, would be, I'm gonna go downstairs, I'm gonna end it, and it's gonna be all your fault. He would also say that about killing my dog. He never threatened to shoot myself, my mom, my sister. He did pull a gun once on my grandfather. But yeah, he absolutely weaponized killing himself, and just that fear of, of him saying, it will be your fault that I am dead, just terrified me.
Does anybody, anything else come? After this, we're gonna have a couple more questions, then we're gonna mill around.
So I was talking to my now 18-year-old daughter yesterday, and she reminded me of something I had forgotten. And she told me about how when she was 5, we were coming home from something, and her baby sister was in the back seat, in a car seat with her, and her stepfather was screaming at me about something, and he just started saying he was going to kill himself and he was going to kill me, and she didn't remember this for 13 years, and she remembered it yesterday and said this to me, and it's hard for her to have these things surface now after all this time, but she said that when she'd come home from school and she would imagine that we would both be dead, and that would be what she would come home to.
And that would not be considered abuse by the courts, because the court will only recognize physical abuse for a criminal.
Oh, here. Oh, okay. Hi. I just prepared something to you about guns, and just what we've been through, and the whole state being in mourning of what happened, and how guns affected my marriage, and what was happening. And I do better if I read, so I won't forget. But I wrote, my ex Charlie was a hunter. It was my first introduction to guns. He had numerous hunting rifles, and shortly after we were married, he purchased a pistol. I didn't have any idea or suspected how much danger I was in with Charlie's short fuse and raging anger and guns. I never realized that. An incident happened on Christmas night, 1987. We were spending the holidays at our house on a deserted dirt road on Sebago Lake. Charlie put a gun to my oldest son's head. Another son physically attacked his father and got the gun. My son that was attacked was in college and he packed his bags and quickly returned to school. My ex would later say the gun wasn't loaded and our son had provoked him. Righteous, narcissistic sociopath that he was. There I stood, my 83-year-old mother with Alzheimer's and my 3 children. What to do? Call the sheriff? No, remember, I always was protecting my ex's good name, as we were talking before. I called Charlie's physician, a prominent doctor in the Portland area. The old boys club prevailed, and I fell into the trap. He told me to take my mother and children back to our house in Scarborough and return to the lake to be with Charlie.
Wow.
Now, imagine, it's Christmas night. It's icy and the roads are treacherous, and we lived on our home was on the 6/10 of a mile of dirt road. I drove to Scarborough and returned to the lake alone. Insanity. I returned to a house shrouded in darkness, and Charlie was there with the gun. Why was my first reaction not to call a sheriff? And I think what Sarah talked about is where I was at that time. Why didn't the physician tell me to get everyone out of the house and call the sheriff? Why did I return to the lake and leave my children? I mean, that's tears in my eyes. I stayed in the marriage another 17 years. It reflects the insanity of domestic violence and the medical profession that failed me and continued to fail me after I left. Now, what happened to me 2 days after my ex had threatened me with a gun, I was called to Maine Medical because I had him a danger to himself and others, so I was in the psychiatric ward at Maine Medical. And they called me in 2 days later to be at a meeting with him to decide whether he should stay there. And there I sat by myself with a tiny little closet room with 3 psychiatrists, a social worker. I mean, not knowing I was suffering from domestic violence, and my PTSD must have been going really strong. And then another time when my daughter said to me, "Mom, I'm not coming anymore with my kids because you go to the beach with me and we're having fun, and then we come back in the house and a different person arrives." She said, "You need to get help." And I was desperate, and this doctor said, "I'll call you tomorrow and see, maybe there's someone." And luckily another friend recommended a therapist that I'm still seeing now. But it's just from all you've heard today, and Sarah spoke for all of us, and we all are speaking for all women. It just, something has to change, and thank you for being here.
One of the things to hang on to is we all have PTSD. All of us. And we will never be the people we were before. It's a huge statement, but I believe it completely. I will never be the person I was, but I like who I am. We're all doing okay. We're out. We've made it.
That's why we're wearing yellow. We're on the bright side. Shine your light for others. Come and join us.
The children must have the yellow.
And yeah, we get two questions, yes. It's considered a misdemeanor. It needs to be a felony. The strangulation is a felony, but they keep putting it down to a misdemeanor. What's the point of it being a felony?
They also call it choking. I love that one.
Choking
is when you swallow something wrong.
Yeah.
What they're doing to us is strangling us.
Yeah. Lots
Let's use the right
of
word.
change, including the district attorney, that Natasha Irving, not doing the job. She's not prosecuting domestic violence. No, a dangerous assessment for bail. They cannot keep releasing these homicidal people out on bail because they can come up with the cash. It's insane. And this gentleman had a question.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Todd Brackett. I'm the county sheriff here in Denver.
Yes.
First off, thank you all. This has been a wonderful presentation and certainly eye-opening for me. But I just have to dig down deeper into your conversation about our justice system, right? Because I'm really pleased to hear the conversation. We as law enforcement are far from perfect. We've evolved over the years. You've heard some stories. I'm sure these panelists can tell other stories about their interactions with law enforcement. So we're on a learning curve still, trying to do a better job. Far from perfect. Imagine our frustration when we do everything that we can and we run into a district attorney like we have here in our district, right? And I could tell you stories, I'm sure you could, about deferred dispositions of cases that were charged involving violence that were reduced and then reduced and then reduced 3 or 4 times that lead us to an armed confrontation that leads to, you know, either an officer-involved shooting or worse, other tragedies like we've seen across Maine. I'm not blaming domestic violence on that particular situation. I'm blaming flaws in the justice system, in part, and our mental health system, right? So I do hope that, listen, I'm a Democrat, I'm in the same party as my district attorney. We disagree. My office isn't very partisan. I'm not a very partisan guy. Those of you that know me, I'm pretty moderate. And our justice system is not the place to fix domestic violence, right? It should be used as a cog in the wheel to break the cycle, right? And to help provide an extra layer of protection when it can. And our district attorney, just like me, is an elected official. And her office she's stretched over 4 counties. And her office, listen, there's a sheriff's report in the paper every week, right? Whether you want to read it or not. Sheriff Brackett reports this, Sheriff Brackett reports that. We don't see that from the district attorney. Her office oftentimes is removed from the front line of public view. You're asking the right questions, and I hope you continue to ask them. She's an elected official just like I am, so that's one way to solve the issue. If her office isn't able to tackle it,
Vote,
probably
yeah.
excommunicated from my party for saying that in this setting. But I mean, I feel that strongly about it. I'm glad to hear the conversation. I'm glad you brought it up, and I hope you keep asking the questions.
Thank you very much. Get in touch, volunteer, there's lots that we're doing. You donate, year-end giving, think about us. But add your voice to ours. We'd love to have you join us.